Los Angeles's night wasn't like an ordinary night. There was a strange, mixed taste of salt and smoke in the air, as if the ocean was breathing its cool breath over the city, and the fire was burning that breath red. Above the city, the sky was orange and crimson, like the sun had returned even after setting, except this time it came with heat and fear. The highways that usually shimmered with car lights had disappeared between the screaming sounds of fire engines and the flashing emergency lights. People were peeking out from their windows, phones in hand, calling someone, recording videos, but on every face there was the same question: when will this fire stop? From the hills, a long snake of fire was crawling downward. At first it was only a flicker, a distant glow, a thin red line in the darkness. Then the wind picked up, and that line stuck out its tongue. Dry grass, old trees, and sparks carried by the wind made the fire hungry. Every moment it spread further, as if it had decided to wrap the city in its arms. People who lived in this city weren't strangers to the sight of fire. Every year something burned somewhere, some small wildfire, some corner of a hill. But this time it was different. This time the wind had changed direction, and the fire's temperament had changed too. For the firefighters, this wasn't just another mission. It was a long war where exhaustion, heat, and time had all become enemies. Inside a fire station, people in gear were preparing fast. Helmets being strapped on, oxygen tanks checked, someone yanking their gloves tight. There was sweat on their faces, but a hard decision in their eyes. They knew that once they climbed into the truck and headed toward the flames, every turn could bring something new: a sudden gust, a falling tree, the scream of a house begging for help. In an old neighborhood, Maria stood with her mother. Their small home, where childhood memories lived inside the walls, lay in the fire's path. Police had issued an evacuation order, but for Maria's mother, leaving the house wasn't easy. For her, it wasn't just a structure of bricks. It was a lifetime of work, happiness, and grief all tied to the same place. Smoke was slipping inside from outside, and with every breath, fear came with it. Maria looked out the window. The fire's glow was close now. She held her mother's hand and gently told her they had to leave. Outside, people were stuffing their cars in a rush: photos, documents, or just clothes. You couldn't take everything with you, and that truth shook everyone from the inside. When Maria stepped out of the house, she turned back and looked. She felt like she wasn't leaving just the home, she was leaving a part of herself. On the other side of the city, news helicopters circled overhead. Their cameras captured the sea of flames from above and carried it to the world. On TV screens, anchors delivered updates in serious voices, but the restlessness behind their words couldn't be hidden. This was no longer only Los Angeles' story. It had become an image for the whole world, a city standing between fire and wind. Sometimes, in the middle of the fire, an eerie silence rose up too. When the wind paused for a moment, it felt like everything had stopped. Then suddenly a hard gust would hit, and everything started again. Trees burned and collapsed, sparks flew into the sky, and the fire changed its direction. Voices echoed through firefighters' radios, coordinates, warnings, and sometimes just a deep breath that said someone was still fighting. Night was slowly turning into morning, but the light wasn't from the sun. It was the fire's light keeping the city awake. People were gathering in shelters, strangers standing side by side, as if disaster had made everyone equal. Someone was holding children, someone was giving water to the elderly, and someone sat quietly thinking about a home that might now exist only in memory. This fire in Los Angeles wasn't just burning wood and houses, it was testing faith. In every heart there was one hope, that by morning, maybe the wind would have changed, maybe the fire would be tired. But in that moment, in that night, the city knew only one thing. It was still alive, and as long as it could breathe, it would keep fighting. When the first ray of morning appeared at the edge of the sky, even its light carried less peace and more exhaustion. The sun looked like it was hesitating behind a curtain of smoke. The city was still awake, neither fully night nor fully morning. The streets were quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that brings calm. It was the quiet that comes after fatigue, when even sounds have nothing left to say. The firefighters had slowed after fighting all night, but the war wasn't over. Their clothes were filled with ash, smoke streaks had settled onto their faces. Their eyes were red and heavy, but their feet were still firmly on the ground. Someone removed their helmet and sat down. Someone held a bottle of water with both hands like they were holding onto life itself. Radios still crackled. Here the fire weakened. There it flared up again. Maria sat in a corner of the shelter. Her mother sat with her, wrapped in a blanket, eyes closed as if she wanted to forget everything for a moment. Maria stared at the screen in front of her, where different parts of the city were listed with red and yellow markers glowing beside them. Every marker had a story attached: someone's home, someone's shop, the center of someone's life. She thought, if their house survived, she would be grateful, and if it didn't, she would still be grateful to be alive. That night had taught her that losing things hurts, but losing people is far more terrifying. In some parts of the city, the fire was retreating. Helicopters dropped water and fire retardant from above, and teams on the ground formed lines to hold the flames back. In places, steam rose from the earth, as if the ground itself was taking a deep breath. The smell of burned grass hung in the air, and every breath reminded you this was real, not a bad dream. As the day grew brighter, the signs of destruction became clearer. Where homes had stood yesterday, only blackened shells of walls remained. Cars were covered in ash, as if time had painted them gray. Some people were returning to their neighborhoods the moment permission was given. Their steps were slow, their hearts racing. Someone stood silently in front of their house, staring. Someone sat on the ground holding their head. Someone looked up at the sky and cried without a sound. For the firefighters, even this day wasn't easy. The work after the flames can be just as hard, finding hidden embers and putting them out before they flare again. Exhaustion had moved from the body into the mind, but everyone knew that one small mistake could erase the entire struggle of the night. So they stood again, lifted the hoses again, and walked back into the burned outlines of the fire. Near evening, the wind began to shift. Cool air started pushing the smoke away little by little. The fire that had surrounded the city the day before began to shrink. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a sign of hope. For the first time, a faint light appeared on people's faces, not a smile, but a belief that maybe tomorrow would be better. Night fell again, but this time the darkness felt lighter. The city had lost a lot, but not everything. Even between ash, life finds its way. Los Angeles was still alive that night, tired, burned, but not broken. And when people closed their eyes, there was only one thought in their hearts, that when morning comes, maybe the fire will live only in memory, and the city will begin writing its story again. When morning came the second time, its light felt completely different. There was still smoke, but it didn't sting the way it had before. The air was cool, as if the city, after burning all night, had finally taken a deep breath. Sunlight fell on the burned walls and made them not golden, but truthful, truth you can't hide, but also can't move forward without facing. When Maria and her mother were finally allowed to return, their journey was quiet. The car moved slowly down the same road they had fled in a rush. Ash was scattered on both sides, and the blackened trunks of trees stood like witnesses. Maria's heart pounded at every turn, as if each new view demanded a decision: be ready or break. When they reached their street, the car slowed on its own. Some homes had turned to dust. Some were half-burned. And some, as if by a miracle, were still standing. Maria looked at her mother. There were tears in her eyes, and strength too. Maria opened the door. For a moment, neither of them had the courage to go inside, as if stepping in would make the truth heavier. Inside, the scene was both empty and full. Smoke stains marked the walls. Some things had burned. But the house was standing. The roof was intact, and the rooms could still be recognized. Maria's mother gently ran her hand along the wall, like she was comforting an old friend. In that moment, Maria understood. Surviving isn't only about the body. Sometimes a place survives too, and it can be part of your life. In other parts of the city, the story was different. Only memories remained. People tried to piece their lives back together, someone cleaning a burnt photo frame, someone searching through ash for something they could still recognize. Every small thing found felt like a victory. Firefighters continued circling the neighborhoods as if placing a hand on the city's wounds to check whether the pain might rise again. The day went on, and slowly the city began to find its voice again. The tap of hammers, the sound of cleaning machines, a child's soft laughter, together they formed a new rhythm. This wasn't the city from before the fire, but it wasn't only a name for destruction either. It was the in-between moment, where the road forward had to be found. That evening, Maria stood on her rooftop. The sky was clear, and for the first time in many days, stars were visible. The air was cool, and the smell of smoke had faded. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. This city had seen fire and fear, and still it stood. She thought, maybe life is like this city too. Sometimes it burns, sometimes it breaks, but if you stop and breathe, you can begin again. Night deepened, but this time the darkness wasn't heavy. Los Angeles had left burn marks on this page of its story, but it had also left room for tomorrow. Under the ash, the ground was still alive, and so were the people standing on it. And when the city fell asleep, it didn't sleep with fear, but with a tired hope that from what burned, something new could still be born. When the final night came, it felt like a decision. Not fully filled with fear, not completely peaceful, just carrying a promise. A soft wind moved over the city, as if it wanted to take the last grains of ash away and say goodbye. Streetlights were on, but their glow was no longer competing with the fire. It was simply guiding the way. Maria watched people walking down the street. Someone carried grocery bags. Someone spoke quietly to someone else. Life was asking for its small habits back, and the city was slowly giving them. She realized the hardest thing after disaster isn't building a house again. It's building memories that can breathe without fear. Outside the fire station, the line of trucks had grown shorter. Some engines were back in place, as if breathing peacefully after a long journey. The firefighters' faces were still tired, but there was a quiet pride in their eyes. They knew they hadn't only stopped fire, they had one time. Time for people to gather themselves. Time to stand again. In some neighborhoods, it was still dark. Power would take time to return. Roads would take time to repair. But even in the dark, small candles were burning inside homes. Every flame was a story. We are here. We are not gone. Children sat around those candles, making up their own stories. Someone said the fire was a giant animal. Someone said firefighters were superheroes. The truth was probably somewhere in between. Maria made tea with her mother. In the steam rising from the cup, she felt a warmth that doesn't come from things, but from togetherness. They sat quietly, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that comes after deep pain, when words run out, and the heart speaks more. In the last part of the night, the sky was completely clear. Stars shone bright, as if reminding the city that the world is bigger than this. Below, Los Angeles stood, breathing, alive, not completely new, not completely broken. Just living, and then morning was coming. A morning without the fire's glow. A morning that would step forward on ash. The city had closed this part of its story, not with celebration, not with tears, but with a hard, deep hope. Because when a city stands even after burning, it doesn't remain just a city, it becomes a symbol, and when that morning arrived, there was no announcement in its sound. No siren, no frantic running. Only the soft cry of birds returning after many days. Los Angeles opened its eyes and recognized itself, wounded, exhausted, but still present. Sunlight slowly lightened. The ash on the roads, as if saying with every step, leaving what has passed behind is how you stay alive. People went back to work. Someone cleared burned wood in front of their house. Someone helped a neighbor straighten a wall. There was less talking, but more togetherness. People who had only known each other by name now knew each other by pain. Disaster had shortened distances between them, as if fire had burned away only the wrong things. Maria walked through her street. Every house told a different story. Somewhere only the roof remained. Somewhere only the doorway. Somewhere everything. She felt the city was like a person. Every wound leaves a mark, but every mark isn't weakness. Some marks remind you that you can fall and still stand. Days passed. Smoke turned into memory, ash into soil. Life regained its pace, but it wasn't careless like before. People paused more, thanked more. When the sun set in the evening, they looked at the sky and felt not only beauty, but safety. This story didn't end with loud celebration. The city didn't raise a victory flag, and it didn't complain about loss. It simply lifted its weight and kept moving. Because the real victory is this: surviving even after burning and dreaming again while still alive. And so Los Angeles didn't close its story after the fire. It only turned a page. The next page still had to be written by people's hands, by their choices, and by hopes that never turned to ash. Time took another step forward. The city began to feel itself again. Ash wasn't only in the air anymore, it was in memories too, but even memories slowly change. What was once pain became a lesson. What was once fear became caution. Los Angeles understood, keeping its breath steady, that the fire had taken some things, but not its soul. Maria often sat on the rooftop in the evenings, watching the city. The lights seemed brighter now, maybe because their value had grown. The sound of cars below felt like a sign of life again, not noise. Her mother often said that saving the house is a blessing, but saving the bond with neighbors is an even bigger one. And Maria knew it was true. When firefighters passed through that street, people didn't clap or chant. They only looked at them with quiet respect, as if the city itself recognized them. For the firefighters it was a job, but for the city it was the thread of breath that had been saved from breaking. Seasons changed. On the burned hills, the first green shoots appeared. Tiny buds rose between the ash, as if saying life's path is never permanently closed. When people saw them, they paused and smiled, not the smile of joy, but the smile of belief. And then one day, without any announcement, the city returned to normal. But that normal wasn't the old normal. Now every morning carried gratitude, and every evening carried a quiet prayer. Los Angeles didn't make the fire its identity. It made it one chapter of its story, a chapter that would remind it that even if everything burns, both people and cities can stand again. In that way, the story reached its ending, not with applause, not with tears, but with a deep, stubborn hope. Because a city that survives after burning never truly ends its story. It just keeps moving forward. Then came a day when the city learned to walk straight again, leaving the old pain behind, not because the wounds were fully healed, but because it had learned to carry them. Los Angeles's streets filled up again, cafe doors opened, and by the ocean people once again paused in the evenings to watch the sun go down. The waves rose and fell like always, calm, confident, like they were saying time doesn't stop, it only knows how to flow. Maria began organizing her life again. The things that once felt important before the fire now felt like weight. And the things that once felt small, having tea together, smiling at a neighbor, feeling the morning light, had become real wealth. There was a new calm on her mother's face too, as if after that night she had understood life again. Schools filled up again. Children who had grown up with fear during those fire days now poured that fear into colors and words. Someone drew pictures with red and orange everywhere. Someone wrote stories where fire was a test and humans were the answer. Teachers didn't only want to teach them lessons, they wanted them to learn how to feel, how life can break, but courage can be learned. The burned hills grew greener and thicker. When rain came, the scent of wet earth spread through the air, the scent of a new beginning. People stood there quietly, as if renewing a promise. We will care for this land. We won't make carelessness a habit. The fire hadn't only frightened them, it had reminded them of responsibility, and the city, once seen under the fire's glow, now began making its own light through people's work, their choices, their quiet prayers. It wasn't a loud light, but it was steady. It didn't have noise, but it had impact. There was no last sentence to this story. Because when a city is alive, its story is written every day, each morning, each evening. Los Angeles left the fire behind, but kept what it learned. And with that, without any announcement, without any claim, life kept moving forward in its flow, quiet, strong, endlessly alive. Then came an evening that didn't feel different from any other, and maybe that's what made it special. The sky changed color, orange to blue, blue to deep, just like it always does. The only difference was that this time people watched a little longer, as if they wanted to be sure everything truly was okay. that the fire lived only in memory, Maria stood on the rooftop and looked down at the city lights. Those lights weren't a sign of emergency anymore. They were simply the rhythm of life. Every light was a home, every home a story. She felt that after that night, the city had changed her too. She had learned to feel moments instead of clinging to things. She had learned to live inside what is. Down below, someone laughed, someone sang, someone simply walked. It was all ordinary, and being ordinary was the greatest thing. The fire had stolen that from the city, and time had given it back. That return didn't come with loud celebration. It came with a deep calm that slowly settled into people's hearts. Night grew deeper, and the air was cold. But there was no fear in that cold. Only memory. Memory that carried both pain and strength. Los Angeles had closed this page of its story, but the book was still open. The pages ahead would not be written by fire, people would write them, and so, without announcements, without promises, the city kept traveling forward. Standing even after burning had become its nature. And whenever night came, and morning followed, this truth was quietly repeated. Life doesn't stop. It only keeps moving in new forms. Time continued, as it always does, without asking. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The fire was mentioned less in the news, and even less in everyday conversations. But its impact remained, not on the city's body, but on its way of thinking. When the wind grew strong, people would unknowingly pause and look toward the sky. When they saw smoke rise somewhere, their hearts would race for a moment. Then they would remember right now, everything is okay. Maria noticed she had stopped being afraid in silence. Before, fear would arrive suddenly, without knocking. Now, even if a memory rose, she could recognize it. This is only memory, not reality. She made a small space in her life where she sat in the evenings and wrote. Sometimes sentences, sometimes only words. Those words became her healing, what she couldn't say out loud. She could write in some corners of the city. New construction rose over old memories. New homes, new walls, new colors. But people knew what lay beneath, ash, and beneath that the earth that had survived everything. That's why the new foundations weren't only made of cement. They included caution and responsibility too. Sometimes in the evenings the wind would blow exactly the way it had that night. In that moment the city would pause. Then a child would laugh, a car would honk, a door would close, and life would remind everyone that this moment belongs to the past. Past, but not wasted. One day Maria stood by the ocean. Waves hit her feet and pulled back again. After the fire, water felt deeper to her, more peaceful, more certain. She thought maybe life is like that too. Sometimes it spreads like fire, sometimes it steadies itself like water. Both are necessary. Both are true in their own way. And the city? The city was still there. Not as a hero, not as a victim. Just as a living place, one that falls, recovers, and keeps walking. The fire had become one part of its story, but not the whole story. The entire city now understood this. What has burned isn't always finished. Sometimes that's where the strongest beginning starts. Then came a morning that looked like any other, and in that ordinariness, its greatest victory was hidden. Light came through windows, the smell of tea rose, and the city began its day without needing any reminder. No sirens, no news that stole your breath. Only time, moving in its own rhythm. Maria closed her diary and stepped outside. People were busy with their lives, someone waiting for a bus, someone walking a dog, someone just walking. There was no difference among them, no sign screaming that there had once been a fire here. And yet beneath every step, the story was still there, quiet, deep, safe. The city had learned that not everything needs to be spoken. Some truths are only felt. Like the slight change in the wind, like the scent of soil after rain, like the lightness in your chest when you come home and close the door. These moments proved that life isn't only surviving, it's living. With time, new memories formed. New celebrations, new worries, new joys. The fire's memory slowly moved back, not disappearing completely, just taking its place. And now when it was mentioned, there was less fear in the voice and more understanding, like looking at an old photograph and saying, "It was hard, but we made it through." And in this way, the city didn't close its story. It kept writing. Every day a new sentence, every night a new pause. The meaning of the story was no longer the fire, it was the people who remained after it, who still laughed after it, and who woke up each morning believing that no matter how much life burns its way through you, it eventually finds light again. Then came a night that was completely quiet, so quiet you could hear the city breathing. Power lines swayed gently in the wind, and somewhere far away a train horn came and went. Los Angeles recognized this silence, different from the silence before the fire, and different from the silence right after it. This was the silence that arrives after a long conversation, when nothing is left to say, only understanding remains. Maria opened the window and looked out. Below, birds sat around a streetlight. She thought maybe the city is like those birds, tired, but still in its place. That night she didn't open her diary. There was no need to write. Life itself was writing, somewhere far off. Wind moved across the hills, and where the fire had once left its mark, grass stood up again. No one stopped to stare, no one took photos. Even this had become ordinary. And being ordinary is the real healing, when things return to their place without reminding you they were once broken. The city had learned one thing from the fire: safety doesn't come only from walls, it comes from people. Neighbors began to recognize each other, doors stayed a little more open, and asking questions no longer felt like weakness. This change didn't arrive with noise. It arrived slowly, quietly, and settled into hearts, and so time kept moving. No day was special, no night was famous. But every moment was valuable. Because a city that passes through fire learns to count moments, not with fear, but with gratitude. Los Angeles wasn't standing at some final turn in this journey. It was simply walking. And maybe the truest ending of a story is exactly that, when the story doesn't try to end itself, but keeps moving alongside life, without stopping, without rushing, simply to remain alive. Then came a moment that couldn't be locked inside a clock. Not morning, not evening, just the in-between. The time when a city hears its own heartbeat. Los Angeles didn't ask itself any questions in that moment. It simply felt the tiredness of the streets, the warmth of the walls, and the gentle touch of wind that comes only when everything is in its place. Maria felt her dreams had changed too. Before, dreams were about what came next, better tomorrows, more things, faster speed. Now dreams were like stopping to breathe. Dreams where a home isn't only a building, but a sound, the sound of dishes being set down, footsteps, laughter. She realized that sometimes happiness is simply the fact that nothing burned today. Older people sat on park benches warming themselves in the sun. Children played in the dirt again, as if the earth had forgiven them. In places, signs still remained, a half-burned wall, an old tree with one blackened side. But those signs didn't scream. They stood quietly, as if saying, "We passed through this, and we didn't stop." With time, the city learned that memory doesn't have to become a burden. Memory can become a path. When the wind blew hard, people closed their windows with caution, not panic. When news arrived, people asked, understood, and then decided. This city was no longer only a city that survives, it was becoming a city that lives by learning. And the story? The story was no longer about one night, one fire, one fear. It was about small victories, one front door that opens in the morning, one hand that holds another hand, one city that wakes up every day and says, "We are here." And so, without a final period, without a limitation, the story kept flowing like water. Because when life returns to its rhythm, the story doesn't end, it simply becomes more true. Then one day the city found itself surprised that it had stopped being surprised. Not by wounds, not by their memories. Everything had returned to its place, not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes enough is the greatest gift life can give. When Maria woke up in the morning, she first opened the window and felt the air. It had become her new habit. If the air was cool, gratitude. If it was warm, caution. Every feeling carried a reminder, and every reminder carried responsibility. She learned that before you run fast through life, you need to feel it. Markets filled again. Sounds, colors, scents, everything returned. But there was a softness in those sounds now. Even in a rush, people noticed one another. Eyes met. As if everyone knew they had passed through the same test, and so understanding each other had become easier. Far away, Wind moved across the hills at night, and grass rustled. That sound used to arrive as fear. Now it was simply a sign that nature was doing its work. What the fire took, time had begun returning in its own way, slowly, quietly, without promises. Maria didn't remember when she had written the last line in her diary. Maybe because there is no last line. Every day opens a new page without asking. And the city did the same each morning, without new fear, without old terror, only with the belief that breath is still moving today. And when night came and light slowly turned on, Los Angeles made no claim about itself. It simply stayed present, alive, standing. And maybe that was the deepest truth in this story, that when a city learns to keep walking even after burning, its story never stops. It only knows how to keep flowing. When the final morning arrived, it didn't need to prove anything. The city opened its eyes and simply walked forward. Not with fear, not with pride, only with certainty. What Los Angeles had seen, what it had endured, was no longer its identity. It had become its understanding. Maria closed the front door and slowly turned the key. Inside, there were the same sounds that keep life alive, the soft tap of dishes being set down, footsteps on the floor, wind coming through a window. She paused and took a breath. There was no fear in that breath. Only gratitude. Only presence. Children were playing in the parks. The hills were fully green again. Cars moved along the streets, conversations filled the cafes, and in the evenings the sun set the way it always has. The fire wasn't standing in front of anyone anymore. It had fallen behind into a layer of memory where only lessons rise, and so the story closed itself. Without noise. Without a dramatic ending. Because a city that learns to keep walking after burning doesn't need an ending. Every morning it writes its own last line, and every evening quietly corrects it. Los Angeles was still standing there. Alive. Steady. And the story stopped here, not because nothing was left, but because, at last, everything was okay.